This is Puget Sound, an inlet of the Pacific Ocean, offering safe passage for marine vessels to ports in the state of Washington. The cities of Seattle, Tacoma, and Everett thrive along its shore in the lush setting of the Pacific Northwest. While water ties these cities to the Orient, their connections to the rest of the U.S. and Canada are made with steel. Join 7 Idea Productions as we follow the BNSF along Puget Sound between Seattle and the Canadian border at Blaine. Beginning on the Scenic Subdivision, we will visit the Seattle waterfront and busy Balmer Yard at Interbay. The line heads north along the beautiful shoreline of Puget Sound, and we will show you several hotspots, including Carkeek Park, Richmond Beach, Edmonds, and Everett. Joining the Bellingham Sub, we continue north through lush farmland to Stanwood and on to Mount Vernon, Burlington, and Bellingham. Unit coal and crude oil trains abound, along with hotshot intermodals, and a great mix of locals powered by 4-axle Jeeps. Passenger trains are everywhere, like Amtrak's Empire Builder, Cascades Talgo trains, and Sounder commuter trains hurry between station stops. A visit to Puget Sound would not be complete without seeing the many container ships, tugs, and ferries that ply the waters. Or the classic lift and swing bridges that allow for the coexistence of maritime and rail traffic. Join us now as we travel along Puget Sound. BNSF Scenic and Bellingham Subdivisions. Today's journey along Puget Sound will cover the western portion of BNSF's Scenic Subdivision between Seattle and Everett, and the entire Bellingham Sub between Delta Junction and the Canadian border at Blaine, a total distance of roughly 123 miles. The Scenic Sub is part of BNSF's Northern Transcon and runs between Seattle and Wenatchee, 154.4 miles to the east over Stevens Pass. Movements are dispatched as either eastbound or westbound. For this reason, traffic heading north out of Seattle is actually moving timetable east, while southbound trains are considered westbound. We will begin at North Portal, milepost 1.6 on the Scenic Sub, and head railroad east through Interbay, BNSF's Balmer Yard. After crossing the Lake Washington Ship Canal on the Salmon Bay Drawbridge, the double-track main line follows the shore of Puget Sound through Richmond Beach, then a section of single-track for almost 2 miles through Edmonds. Double-track resumes again at control point MP18 and on through Mukilteo and Howarth Park before reaching Everett Junction. The early light of dawn reveals the starting point for today's journey along the Puget Sound. Home to tech giants such as Amazon and Microsoft, Seattle is the 15th largest city in the United States. Located roughly 100 miles south of the Canadian border, Seattle is a major gateway for trade with Asia, boasting the 4th largest container port in North America. Vaguely visible above the forest of gantry cranes stands the 14,410-foot peak of Mount Rainier, the tallest volcano in the Cascade Mountain Range, which extends from southern British Columbia, Canada to northern California. At its base, the waters of Puget Sound provide a protected inland passage from the Pacific Ocean to many harbors including Tacoma, Seattle, and Everett. Seattle is also a gateway to Alaska, and ships have been sailing the famed Inside Passage since the gold rush days of the late 1800s. Today's gold is tourism, and this morning a cruise ship enters Smith Cove at Pier 91. This scene is from the Magnolia Bridge, just south of Interbay, the location of BNSF's Balmer Yard. Incorporated in 1869 along the shore of Elliott Bay, Seattle grew with the timber boom, then later the Klondike Gold Rush. It benefited from the shipbuilding boom of the early 20th century, which peaked during World War I. Built for the 1962 World's Fair, the iconic Space Needle is a landmark of the Pacific Northwest. Standing 605 feet high, it gives visitors a fantastic view of the city. Our view is from Pier 71, near the main line. The Scenic Subdivision begins at nearby King Street Station, where we concluded our program on BNSF's Seattle Subdivision. The track burrows under the city via Seattle Tunnel 17 and emerges again at North Portal, milepost 1.6 on the Scenic Sub. Due to its location within the growing city, the tunnel portal is not accessible. However, one can still see trains emerging near a set of crossovers which appear on the timetable as Station North Portal. Amtrak 1407, a new Siemens Charger, leads Amtrak Cascades Train 516 out of Seattle's King Street Station en route to Vancouver, BC. The Talgo train meets BNSF 6686 West. The mixed manifest has just departed Interbay and is most likely heading for Tacoma or Vancouver, Washington. The train disappears into the heart of the city as the cars shuffle past. A vintage EMD switches grain hoppers at the Pier 86 grain terminal. Served by both BNSF and Union Pacific, the facility can handle up to 175 hoppers and load an entire unit train onto a ship in one day. Railroad east of Pier 86 is the former Great Northern Interbay Yard. Renamed Balmer Yard in the late 1960s, the 80-acre facility includes a 16-track mini hump with over 41 tracks for switching. These Boeing 737 fuselages came into Seattle from Kansas via Stevens Pass and will soon be delivered to Boeing at Renton, just south of Seattle, for final assembly. A pair of EMD SD75Ms shuffle toward the east end of the yard, where we find the car shop and former Great Northern Locomotive Service Facility, which is still referred to by railroaders as Interbay. A holdover from the steam days, The classic 1920s era turntable and roundhouse still exist between Gilman Avenue and West Emerson. Near the Sanding Towers, a GP38AC number 2136 is tested, and its 16-cylinder 645 diesel sings a pleasant tune which drifts throughout the yard. A cache of vintage Great Northern diesels are currently being stored in a pocket track near the roundhouse. The SD9s and SW1200 appear to have been given back their old GN reporting marks. These old warriors silently await their fate. After leaving Interbay, the Scenic Subdivision crosses the Lake Washington Ship Canal via the Salmon Bay Bridge, known as Bridge 6.3 on the timetable. This waterway is a division point between the Ballard and Magnolia districts of Seattle and is quite busy with marine traffic, especially during the summer months. The double-track lift bridge was built by the Great Northern in 1914 and has an opening span of 200 feet. This allows large marine vessels and sailboats with tall masts access to the nearby Ballard locks. The busy ship canal gives the 100-year-old lift bridge a good workout every day. The hut for the bridge tender is located on the north side of the lift span. A massive counterweight balances the span during movement, allowing the bridge to be raised and lowered quickly, while using very little energy. With the span locked in the down position, a westbound oil train led by BNSF 6829 enters Seattle's industrial district. CSX 3465, a General Electric ET44AH, operates by remote control on the rear of the oil cans as the unit train rolls into Balmer Yard. A heron stands guard on the south side of the bridge, just down from the Ballard locks. Opened in 1917, the locks provided a navigable connection between Lake Washington and Puget Sound. Used by creatures both great and small, they carry more traffic than any other lock in the U.S. The summer season is especially busy with small craft and tour ships. A sailboat exits the small lock and signals the Salmon Bay Bridge tender with his horn. Since no trains are approaching, the draw is quickly lifted. The Lake Washington Ship Canal was fully completed in 1934 and consists of 2 locks. The smaller lock measures 30 feet by 150 feet, seen here, and the larger lock measures 80 feet by 850 feet. Operated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the locks allow vessels to pass from the salt water of Puget Sound to the freshwater of Lake Washington at Salmon Bay. 2 boats are secured inside the smaller lock, and the operator in the control tower closes the lower gates, allowing the lock to fill with water, raising the boats to the level of the water above the dam. The Ballard locks were listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1978. While watching the marine traffic at Salmon Bay, we noticed some interesting foot traffic as well. Our heron is out for a stroll and apparently likes our location for viewing the action. Back to the railroad, Amtrak Talgo train number 517 from Vancouver, BC crosses the Salmon Bay Bridge on its daily run to Portland, Oregon. BNSF has recently announced plans to replace the 104-year-old steel structure with a new vertical lift span, so we enjoy these scenes of the classic Great Northern Salmon Bay Bridge while we can. BNSF 6602 East slowly makes its way out of Balmer Yard with a manifest bound for Everett. Check out the cabless GP60B in the locomotive consist. Between Ballard and Everett, the Scenic Subdivision traces the shoreline of Puget Sound, offering many fantastic views along the way. BNSF 4136 West leads an intermodal train consisting mainly of domestic containers and Boeing 737 fuselages past Carkeek Park at milepost 10. Returning in mid-October to Carkeek Park, a blanket of fog covers the water and surrounding lowlands. An evening sounder commuter train heads for Everett on Main 1. 30 minutes later, another sounder follows suit in push mode. Between the commuter trains, a high-priority Z led by BNSF 5421 heads eastbound on Main 2. From a small beach near Piper's Creek, a third sounder takes passengers between Seattle and Everett. The pedestrian footbridge at Carkeek Park is a great location for photographing trains in either direction. This time we use it to frame Amtrak 8, the eastbound Seattle section of the Empire Builder. As twilight draws near, the curtain of fog begins to recede over the cold waters of Puget Sound. The view of the rails improves from the small beach as another sounder sprints north. And MPI MP40-3C powers the short commuter train in push mode. Its EMD 710 diesel is capable of producing 4,000 horsepower. As the train slowly fades into the fog, the sound of other prime movers fills the air. An unseen tug tows a barge north, alerting other ships to its presence with a long horn blast every 2 minutes. The ambience of evening on Puget Sound. BNSF 6903 appears from the south and leads a crude oil train toward Cherry Point. In the October twilight, the tug and its tow are finally revealed in the receding fog. The blast of its horn is seemingly answered by a distant train. A westbound intermodal is clicking off the final miles of its journey from Chicago. Dusk settles in as the train continues railroad west toward Seattle. Another day of rail fanning has drawn to a close. Waves pound the shore at Richmond Beach, milepost 14 on the Scenic Subdivision. Coal trains from the Powder River Basin in Wyoming and Montana are a common appearance, hauling black diamonds to Roberts Bank, BC for export. Loaded trains head north, while empties return south. SD70 ACE number 9007 and two GE-9s bring the train to a slow crawl near the end of double track at milepost 16 in a meet with a westbound stack train. With the coal train out of the way, BNSF 6587 West passes the house tracks at Richmond Beach. Containers by the hundreds roll through Richmond Beach each day by rail. Many of them pass a second time on large container ships sailing to and from the Orient. The shipping lanes of the Pacific Ocean are accessed from Puget Sound via the Strait of Juan de Fuca and the Strait of Georgia, providing an inland route to ports from Vancouver, BC to Tacoma, Washington. Much gentler than the waters of the Pacific coast, the Sound offers safe travel for large and small craft alike. Ferries are a common sight on Puget Sound, and many residents rely on them for daily transportation and goods. The Kingston to Edmonds ferry disappears behind the seawall at Richmond Beach as a northbound sounder follows the scenic shoreline. BNSF 8453 West leads a manifest train out of Everett. The rear of the manifest meets Amtrak Talgo train number 518, just minutes from a stop at Edmonds. Puget Sound is known for its sunsets, and on this smoky evening in late July, we are not disappointed. The next morning, a marine layer covers the sky as we move railroad east to Point Wells between Richmond Beach and Edmonds. Amtrak 7, the westbound Empire Builder, heads for Seattle after splitting with the Portland section of the train at Spokane in eastern Washington. On a summer afternoon in Edmonds, one can enjoy the ever-present traffic on Puget Sound. The city has 5 miles of shoreline opposite the Kitsap Peninsula. A state-run ferry system connects Edmonds with the peninsula at Kingston, allowing both commuters and commerce access to the mainland. The transportation center of Edmonds is the train station, located right behind the ferry terminal. Amtrak 104 North approaches the station. After departing Edmonds Station, the line goes back to double track near milepost 18. The Sounder heads east on Main 1. BNSF 6227 West appears around the bend as it holds Main 2 in a meet with BNSF 5827 East. Empty center beams are shuffled north for more Canadian lumber. With the eastbound manifest out of the way, the 6227 gets a light to continue west. Bound for Vancouver, Washington, this train has loaded center beams with kiln-dried lumber from Canada, wrapped in plastic to keep dry. The names West Fraser and Canfor are common on lumber loads heading south of the border. Late in the afternoon, a BNSF officer special heads for Everett. Running one by one, this train is making a short commute from Balmer Yard to Everett and back, and we will see it again on its return trip. In the meantime, there is a lot to see from our location at milepost 18. More containers slowly make their way south to either Seattle or Tacoma, while a tug tows a pair of barges en route to Alaska. Farther to the north, a barge of wood chips is heading south of Everett. Back on the rails, a different-looking train is heading our way, Canada's Rocky Mountaineer. This train is known for its spectacular daylight runs through the Canadian Rockies, and we have shot it on numerous occasions in British Columbia and western Alberta. A few years ago, the Mountaineer began service to Seattle, Washington as part of its coastal package route, giving people in the States direct access to the spectacular scenery of Western Canada by rail. Edmonds is a busy place today, with the BNSF dispatcher having to make several meets due to the section of single track between here and Richmond Beach. Today's Rocky Mountaineer is led by RMRX 8011, an EMD GP40-2LW built in 1975. The W designates the Canadian Comfort Cab, while the L indicates it is equipped with a lighter, taller frame than a standard GP40-2. Like the trailing unit, number 8016, which is actually a GP40-2R. The red signal gives us a chance to admire the consist. The Mountaineer is a seasonal train running between April and October, with Saturday visits to Seattle between mid-May and September. BNSF 7815 East appears with a stacked train of overseas containers. With the stack train out of the way, the Mountaineer continues to Seattle. We will catch it again later on. Sunset Beach is popular with local residents of Edmonds and a great place to view trains in action. A westbound oil train stops short of milepost 18 for Amtrak 518, running between Portland and Vancouver, BC. A few miles behind the oil cans, a westbound stacker approaches Edmonds and meets the Talgo train. In the distance, the Whidbey Island Ferry can be seen approaching Mukilteo, while a headlight gives away our next westbound. The BNSF's Officer Special is making its return trip now to Seattle. It's high tide as the golden rays of the evening sun bathe the sound in rich summer light. The ferry from Kingston on the Kitsap Peninsula eases toward the dock at Edmonds, while the Olympic Mountains rise in the background. Just before sunset, BNSF 3929 West gets a light and departs with a stack train. The third unit, CSX 7661, is a C40-8W built in May of 1991. Before moving on, we hang around to find out just why it is named Sunset Beach. Continuing up the shore of Puget Sound, a low tide at Mukilteo reveals an interesting rock formation that closely resembles a drawbar, lying 100 feet from the tracks. The Seattle and Montana Railroad, later the Great Northern, laid rail through here in 1891, connecting it with Everett and Seattle. Commuter traffic between those cities still continues today with Amtrak Cascades and Sounders. The tide rolls in, reclaiming the unfortunate drawbar for another 12 hours. Mukilteo serves as a major terminal for the Washington State Ferry System, linking nearby Whidbey Island with the mainland. Washington maintains the largest fleet of ferries in the U.S., with currently 23 vessels carrying over 24 million passengers annually. In 1906, the Federal Lighthouse Service built the iconic Mukilteo Lighthouse to serve increased maritime traffic in Possession Sound. It is constructed of wood with a fixed lens that has been in use since 1927. Turn down the lights and add some fog, and you can really see it in operation. A budget of $22,000 was approved for the lighthouse by Congress in 1902. A huge sum of money at the time, but deemed necessary to make the waterways safe and profitable. It apparently was a good idea, since there are no known stories of shipwrecks in the Mukilteo area. During our October visit, thick fog formed at night and lingered through the morning hours. The Whidbey Island ferries appeared as ghosts on the water, invisible only a short distance from land. Standing in the darkness near the seawall, the vessels are an incredible sight as they suddenly appear at the dock. In 2001, the U.S. Coast Guard gave ownership of the lighthouse to the city, which in turn opened the grounds to the public by creating a park. It is open year-round if you wish to stop by for a visit. The Mukilteo train station is located just a short distance from the Lighthouse Park and serves several commuter trains daily. The Skybox rail cars on the far track carry aircraft parts for a nearby Boeing plant. After leaving the station, Amtrak 105 passes Japanese Gulch as it heads for its final stop of Everett, just a few miles away. Japanese Gulch is named for Japanese mill workers who once lived here in company housing. Later, this site was used as a defense position to protect the Bremerton shipyard and nearby Boeing aircraft factory during World War II. This rail dock is used to load extra-large aircraft parts from ships. On the other side of the dock, the city of Everett comes into view. Soon, we will leave the Scenic Subdivision behind and chart a course for the Canadian border on the Bellingham Sub. BNSF 505 West slowly approaches on Main 2 in a meet with an eastbound. Everett sits on the shore of Possession Sound, part of the greater Puget Sound. It is home to Naval Station Everett since 1994, and the city's roots go back to the timber industry. From an overlook, the evening Amtrak 517 appears around a point near Japanese Gulch as it sprints north in the late afternoon. The Everett waterfront comes into view just west of the crossovers at Howarth Park, milepost 31. BNSF 8536 East leads a manifest into town. This train will be leaving the Scenic Subdivision at Everett Junction, milepost 32.2, and entering the Bellingham Sub. The old station of Everett is located just off the Scenic Subdivision at milepost 1783.9. Mileposts from Everett Junction change as the railroad takes an easterly course, retracing the route of the empire builder James J. Hill through Washington, Idaho, Montana, and on to St. Paul. The Bellingham Sub continues counting up the miles from Seattle's King Street Station. Everett Tunnel 16 is located at milepost 1783.3 on the Scenic Subdivision. At just under a half mile in length, it burrows under downtown Everett toward a course with the Snohomish River over Stevens Pass. BNSF 6209 West exits Tunnel 16. From this angle, one can see the tracks of the Bellingham Sub just below the train to the right, leading to Bayside Yard and Delta Junction. At Everett, the Scenic Subdivision turns to the southeast through Tunnel 16 and on to PA Junction, which is milepost 0.0 on the Bellingham Sub. Here, trains head either to Delta Yard or continue east on the Scenic Sub to Wenatchee. Delta Yard is located between PA Junction and Delta Junction and plays an important role in handling cars from the north, south, and east. On the other side of town, the Bellingham Sub connects to the Scenic Sub at Everett Junction and heads timetable north through Bayside Yard to Delta Junction. From there, it continues north as a single-track main line with sidings crossing the Snohomish River Delta on a series of 3 drawbridges before arriving at Marysville, and Cruise Junction, where it connects to the Arlington branch. From here, it travels through English, Stanwood, Fir, and Mount Vernon. Burlington is a junction with the Anacortes Spur, which services a refinery to the west, and the Sumas subdivision leading to the Canadian border at Sumas. Continuing north, we pass through Bow, Samish, and Bellingham, the namesake of the subdivision. Then Ferndale and Custer, where the Cherry Point sub splits off to the west, servicing the Cherry Point refinery, the largest in Washington state. From Custer, it is just a short distance to Blaine, where trains enter the Canadian border near White Rock, BC. On the northeast side of Everett, BNSF's Delta Yard is located along the Snohomish River. Cars from up and down the I-5 corridor and across the northern Transcon are sorted here. This morning, a crew is doing some flat switching under the Weyerhaeuser Bridge Road, which leads to an industrial complex along the river's edge. The Snohomish River drains the west side of the Cascade Mountains, including both Snoqualmie and Stevens Pass. It enters Puget Sound at Port Gardner Bay between Everett and Marysville, and provides access for commercial barge traffic as well as recreation. Toward the mouth of the river, both the railroad and State Route 529 cross the Snohomish on 3 separate drawbridges. 2 lift bridges carry the highway between Everett and Smith Island, and a swing bridge handles rail traffic on the Bellingham Sub. Beneath the bridges, a seal enjoys a breakfast of salmon. The south end of the bridges fly over Delta Junction at milepost 37 on the Bellingham Sub. It is also milepost 10.9 if coming from Delta Yard. A couple of Jeeps continue switching on the 3rd leg of the Y. The highway crossing of the Snohomish River dates back to 1971 and is used primarily for local traffic as an alternative to nearby Interstate 5. Before this, the only crossing of the Snohomish River Delta was by rail. Great Northern Bridge 37 is a swing bridge which gets its name from its relative milepost. The bridge tender hut sits atop the swing span, and trains call for permission to cross. BNSF 5251 South takes an empty crude oil train across the bridge. Southbound trains crossing Bridge 37 can either be lined to the left into Delta Yard or the right into Bayside. This train is returning from the Cherry Point oil refinery near the Canadian border to the Bakken oil fields of North Dakota. It'll be routed through Seattle via the Scenic Subdivision, so it is hanging a right at Delta Junction. The crew will tie down the train at Bayside, and a fresh crew will take it from there. With the empty oil cans in the clear, the bridge is swung open to clear the river channel. A series of 3 drawbridges take trains over the Snohomish River Delta. Bridge 37 crosses to Smith Island, and nearly a mile to the north, Bridge 37.8 takes trains over Steamboat Slough. BNSF 5334 South slowly approaches Bridge 37.8 with a manifest for Delta Yard. The train will soon be stopping as it waits for permission to cross Bridge 37. Here is a view of the north end of the bridge at mile marker 37.8 during our summer visit to the Bellingham Sub. BNSF 4942 South leads another manifest with loads of Canadian kiln-dried lumber on the point on its way to Delta Yard. Continuing our journey north, we arrive at Marysville at milepost 39. An Ohio locomotive crane is tied down in the 2,557-foot siding as part of a maintenance-of-way train. North of Everett, the beachfront views are replaced with that of fertile farmland, as the Bellingham Subdivision takes an inland course past the siding of English. At Sill Road, BNSF 3828 races north toward Mount Vernon. Fields of corn grow tall in the lowlands west of the Washington Cascades, with good soil and plenty of water. A southbound empty coal train passes the grain elevator at Sylvana, milepost 50. The Bellingham Sub continues in a northwest heading, past dairy farms and more fields of corn, south of Stanwood. A southbound hauler heads for Everett at Valde Road, behind a trio of classic 4-axle EMDs. Sometimes you can't see the fields for the corn. Transitioning from summer to fall, the surrounding farmland is more readily visible after the harvest. In the haze of an October afternoon, BNSF 4212 North is seen again as it clicks off the miles toward Stanwood. The second unit, BNSF 763, still looks fairly sharp in the Santa Fe colors it has worn for over 20 years. On a different day, we set up on the same crossing to catch BNSF 2515 North on the point of the 644 hauler out of Everett, with loads bound for Sumas. The gray double stacks on the head end are large garbage containers. At Stanwood, fields of grass, hay, and potatoes thrive in the August sun along the low-lying deltas, while thunderheads boil over the mountains to the east. Earlier, we caught the southbound Rocky Mountaineer at Edmonds on its journey between Vancouver, BC and Seattle. Now, about 3 hours later, it makes its return trip north. At Fur, milepost 61.5, BNSF 6404 South leads more empty coal buckets past the Conway grain elevators. South of Mount Vernon, fields of wheat and corn line the tracks near the South Fork of the Skagit River. On this day, a local out of Burlington is in the hole at Mount Vernon for a northbound coal train. With 3 engines on the point and a radio-controlled unit bringing up the rear, Powder River Basin coal trains head north for the Roberts Bay Export Terminal south of Vancouver, BC. The trains are emptied using a rotary dumper and sent back south. With the coal train out of the way, the local continues south. This move is powered by 2 GP38-2s, which have their hands full with quite a train, including 4 loaded wood chip gondolas on the point. Summertime thunderclouds continue to build over the North Cascades, promising evening rain. The 10,000-foot peak of Mount Baker is briefly visible. At 8:30 p.m., Southbound Amtrak 519 heads through Mount Vernon on its run between Vancouver, BC and Edmonds, Washington. Notice the lack of a cab car on the B end of the train. The summer sun calls it a night, silhouetting the crossing of Peter Johnson Road and the intermediate signals south of the control point at Mount Vernon, as our journey toward the Canadian border continues. We visited the same crossing in mid-October and find the evening sun much farther to the south. The elevators at Conway rise above golden fields as BNSF 5859 leads another Roberts Bank coal train north toward Mount Vernon. Behind it, BNSF 4193 North follows suit with a manifest. The next morning, the Skagit Valley is socked in with fog. A southbound oil train blows for the crossing at West Stackpole Road. The scene is repeated at dusk. The siding at Mount Vernon is 6,075 feet in length. The north switch is located in the town for which it was named. BNSF 2269 heads through town with the Conway turn. This job handles customers between Marysville and Mount Vernon. And tonight, the crew will be tying up at Burlington, just a few miles to the north. Between Mount Vernon and Burlington, trains cross the Skagit River on a 3-span through-truss bridge located at milepost 70. 3 classic EMDs, including a GP60B, head for Burlington. Later that evening, Amtrak Talgo train number 518 heads north across the river. Trackside, BNSF 9277 takes a loaded coal train over the Skagit River. At milepost 71.2, Burlington marks the junction with the Sumas Branch Line and Anacortes Spur. Amtrak 516 heads north on the Bellingham Sub. The track veering off to the right is the Scenic Subdivision, which connects to the Canadian border. This secondary line sees a nightly local working between Sumas and Burlington. On the main line, BNSF 7160 heads south through Burlington with a colorful locomotive consist. At night, a switch job works the junction at Burlington, utilizing the Anacortes Spur. Unit tank trains use this track, accessing the Anacortes refinery west of here at March Point, along with 2 switch jobs out of Burlington. Also considered part of the Bellingham Subdivision, All mileposts on the line are designated with a Z. The local backs to clear the crossing of Greenleaf Avenue as we continue north. The next siding north of Burlington is Bow at milepost 79.7. BNSF 5742 North takes the 8,884-foot siding with an interesting freight that even includes a caboose of sorts. Attached to the rear of the train is the Tioga Pass, a former Canadian national business car built in 1959. The passengers are no doubt having a great trip, as long as the engineer watches his slack. The next morning, Amtrak 516 North passes on the main at South Bow with the same Talgo set we saw the previous day at Mount Vernon. Again, no cab car, just the power car bringing up the rear of the train. After leaving Bow, the railroad hugs the shoreline of Snohomish Bay. This is Blanchard, a semi-ghost town which once boasted a population of 1,000 during the logging boom of the early 20th century. Route 11 crosses over the main line as Amtrak 517 heads south for Seattle. We shoot the same scene in summer, minus the fog, with BNSF 6505 North. From the Blanchard Highway Bridge, we get our first look at Snohomish Bay and an encore run of Amtrak 517. It met BNSF 7705 north at Bow. Our next stop along the Bellingham Sub is Snohomish, milepost 83.5. Although it is not officially recognized as a station, there is a 55-car siding here used by maintenance of way. Amtrak 516 appears out of the fog with a surprise consist. An oyster farm is located by the bay and has been around since the 1920s. The fog persists as BNSF 7160 is seen again, this time leading a northbound empty grain train for Canada. In contrast to the busy I-5 corridor that these rails follow, Snohomish is quiet and removed. The tracks pass through the Sleepy Hollow into Tunnel 18 on their way to Bellingham. The fog rolls back as a more traditional-looking Amtrak Cascades number 517 rolls by. With both Amtrak trains out of the way, BNSF North Branch Dispatcher gives a maintenance of way crew tracking time between Snohomish and Burlington to do some work. A self-powered Ohio locomotive crane blows for the crossing at Snohomish. Right behind him, a high-rail excavator heads south into the sea of fog. Continuing north, the railroad enters an inlet of Bellingham Bay known as Teddy Bear Cove. Out in the water, features like Chuckanut Rock and Chuckanut Island add to the peaceful setting. We are actually just south of Bellingham, although one won't see much development on this side of Tunnel 21. BNSF 7160 is seen again as it exits the tunnel. Entering Bellingham, an elevated walk extends over the currently invisible bay, paralleling the main line at milepost 94.2. Amtrak 516 is seen again with the GE Genesis units and passenger coaches instead of the standard Talgo train set. BNSF has a small yard at Bellingham and several jobs serve industry north and south of here. At the north end of the yard off of Roeder Avenue, BNSF 5253 North passes on the main with a Roberts Bank coal train. Another swing bridge is found over the Nooksack River at Ferndale, milepost 105.8. The new West Local out of Bellingham heads for Custer in the morning fog. The Bellingham Subdivision becomes a double-track main line between Ferndale and Swift, with crossovers keeping traffic fluid around the very busy junction with Cherry Point near Custer. We get one last look at the BNSF 7160 South, which has completed its customs inspection after entering the U.S. The crew is short on hours and hope to make it to Bow for a waiting dog catch crew before reaching their hours of service. They will barely make it. Amtrak 517 appears out of the fog at Custer, milepost 111.8. The train has a Seattle Seahawks cab car in the lead and a new Siemens Charger number 1403 doing the work in push mode. The sun breaks through the morning fog at Custer. Just ahead, the new West Local we caught at Ferndale is tied down near the north leg of the junction with Cherry Point. Approaching from the north, BNSF 8269 has permission to enter the junction and will take its train to Intalco on the Cherry Point Subdivision. Cherry Point is a location of the largest oil refinery in Washington state, although you may not even know it was there. The branch line lumbers through the pristine countryside, populated with trees and a patch quilt of farms. Leaving the Bellingham Subdivision, BNSF 8269 crosses Valley View Road en route to Intalco, where it will stop short of Ham Road. The oil train comes to a stop at Intalco, having cleared the main line and grade crossing at Valley View Road. Since it will be waiting for a while, we decide to continue north. Back on the main at Custer, Amtrak 516 crosses over from Main 1 to Main 2. A friendly engineer gives us a whistle and a wave. Our final destination is Blaine, the last siding and town this side of the Canadian border. Skirting the shore of Drayton Harbor, BNSF 8400 South has just crossed the border with an empty coal train. As the rear DPU approaches, the train slows for a customs inspection machine at Swift, just south of here. Operated by the U.S. Customs Service, the X-ray machine scans each unoccupied car. The process requires the train not to exceed 7 miles per hour per operating rules. The Port of Blaine contains a busy harbor, which is home to hundreds of recreational boats. BNSF 5253 passes the harbor as the coal train covers its final mile on U.S. soil. As DPU number 5708 passes us, the head end of the train is already working its way through British Columbia, Canada. An hour after the coal train, another bank of fog blows in from Boundary Bay and the Strait of Georgia. BNSF 7589 appears with an empty oil train. The train passes the old Burlington Northern Depot as it rolls out of town. Blaine began life in the mid-1800s as a seaport for West Coast logging and fishing industries, and was officially incorporated on May 20th, 1890. Today it holds the distinction of being the northernmost town on Interstate 5, with its northern boundary also being the border between the United States and Canada. The Peace Arch stands in both Blaine, Washington and Surrey, BC. The 67-foot structure was built in 1921 by Sam Hill and symbolizes the long history of peace between the two nations. To the west, Boundary Bay opens up into the greater Strait of Georgia, an arm of the Pacific Ocean between Vancouver Island and the mainland coast of British Columbia, as well as Washington State. To the north is White Rock and South Surrey, BC, which is part of the greater Vancouver metro area. If we drew a line due west of Point Roberts, we would reach the Roberts Bank Export Terminal, the destination of northbound coal trains that travel through Seattle. Approaching from the north is our final train. BNSF 8446 passes through White Rock on the new Westminster Subdivision. The 8446 passes the international boundary at milepost 119.6 and enters the United States. BNSF's water level route north of Seattle provides an important link between the U.S. and Canada, while serving a diverse host of industries along the way. From scenic beachfronts to sleepy hollows, small farms to bustling cities, there is a lot to enjoy when visiting BNSF's route along the Puget Sound. Until next time, thanks for watching.